men today need to understand that sexuality is something sacred, a gift given by God for the proper use, like everything given by God. And if you're raised in a Christian home with classical Christian ethics, so to speak, still you need to understand that it's not do this, don't do that, but you need to understand why it's like that.
Fr Mikael Fälthammar, good to have you on board for another conversation.
I'm happy to be here again. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so a lot of people have been watching the last recording that we did, especially Swedes, actually. So maybe there's something about the title Swedish priest, the world's most secular country, who knows what. But I've been having quite a few conversations with people, and there was another thing I thought, like, I've got to talk to Fr Mikael about this. And that is the experience and your input on being married to a woman in not only the world's most secular country, but also the world's most feminist country, I guess, which is Sweden. Denmark's probably somewhere in third, fourth place, I would imagine. We're a little bit further behind, but also somewhere there. And this comes from really, I've had so many conversations with Swedish men who, when we talk about marriage, then there's always this opinion that comes up that marriage just doesn't work anymore. It's not a good option for Swedish men in Scandinavia. So my first question is, could you understand someone who's come to that conclusion living in that country where you are?
Well, when I hear that question, the first thing that comes to mind doesn't it depend on who you married, who you get to marry, the woman you're marrying to, and of course it does. But as you say, Sweden is really one of the most secular countries, and it has been very much affected by third and maybe fourth wave feminism over here. And there was a Swedish politician once, a social democrat, that said that Sweden is a very small country. We only have room for one opinion at a time. So there's really also a homogeneous way of thinking in the media and among politicians, and especially in the middle class, which I think makes up most of people living here. And that opinion is quite informed by feminism and secularism. But I think when the world is more globalized and you have opinions coming from all over the world, you will also have an opening up of that opinion, and more opinions are allowed. And I think that the third and fourth wave of feminism, it doesn't really make women too happy. The promise is that people should be happy by following this progressive ideology, but I don't think that it really does the trick. And I can see small hints of other ways of looking at this, coming through the cracks in the wall, so to speak. But this is a digression, but I think it's rather hopeful to see that this is more and more falling apart, and a more sound way, I think, of viewing these things are coming, not in big waves, but we can see it. So if marriage is no longer an option for men, I think you should, as a young man, you should still keep hope inside, and you should try to, if you're interested in marriage as a path for you, you should be in a context where you would be able to find a woman that you share a worldview with. Of course, as a Christian, I can only recommend the Orthodox Church, and trying to find a woman in that context, because if you're a woman that has, I meet women as well who are tired of the world they're living, and they come to the church and they realize it's not, a conservative, reactionary, old-time medieval religion, but it's really the proper context for any human being. It's what do you say, a hospital for souls. This is a favorite expression, and this applies to both women and men. and you are able to work with all the bad aspects of humanity, all the domination of the manly strength, for example, and all the bad sides of the feminine, of femininity and things like that. Everything you can work with in the hospital of the church, and you can find people that are, more and more healed, more and more becoming truly men, truly women in the church. So I would say that if you look in the church, you would be able to find, and if you practice patience, you would be able to find someone who is a good future husband or wife.
I was actually just talking to somebody who happens to be attending your parish at the moment earlier this week, and there was two things that he mentioned to me, which was the first thing was that this long line to going to confession all the way to the entrance of the church. He was amazed at like just there's all these people standing there waiting patiently to have a moment to go to confess.
Yeah, let me
and
just
then the second thing.
Let me just say one thing there, because there's a lot of talk about toxic masculinity in our world today. And as I said, many secular people think that the church is a reactionary place with not unmodern views of things. I mean, look at that example. You have a line going all the way from the iconostasis back to the entrance of the church, of men, mostly men actually, that want to repent, that want to take steps away from their sin. Those are men that show the utmost humility, because they stand there in line. Everyone can see them. They can see that they want to confess their sins and repent.
They have to tell you about the things that are most embarrassing and painful in their lives.
Yeah. It's not
share
toxic
that with
masculinity. It's masculinity that is being healed in the context of the church. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. It tied in very, very well with what you were saying beforehand as well, as this place of healing, like a hospital. Yeah, and then the second thing he was speaking about was just that so in the Orthodox Church we actually have men and women standing on the left and the right hand side of the church, right? And so he was saying like he looked over on the other side of the church and was just like wow, look at all these beautiful, amazing young women standing here, and he happened to be married himself, but he was like, okay, yeah, you single guys, like, what are you waiting for? So actually, I didn't recall hearing it so explicitly before. Someone putting forward the church as a place to meet a partner, but can you talk a little bit about why you think that could be the case, that maybe the church is the right place to find someone, a life partner, as a man or a woman who's looking for something?
Well, the church, we need to define that first. I mean, I don't mean that during the liturgy or the services, the holy services, you should be, looking around if there's a suitable person.
Checking if they're on Tinder at the same time, maybe.
Sorry?
Checking out who else is on Tinder. I don't know if you could do that.
No, you should be focused on worshiping God. But I mean, in the wider context of the church, of course, people that come to the Orthodox Church, usually they understand that it's a non-worldly body, the body of Christ, and the people that come there because they want to be healed. As I said, they want to be true persons. They want they don't want first and foremost to be the manosphere guys or the feminist ladies or any type of ism. They want to be Christians. They want to be followers of Christ, the God-man, and they want that because they want to be healed. They want to be true human beings. So I think that's I say to people asking me these types of questions that the most important thing that you would want to look for in a partner is that you share the same faith, because this is really the foundation of a happy marriage, I think. Of course, you can be happy if you don't share. I mean, people are different, but in my opinion, the most important thing is really sharing the faith.
Can I just expand a little bit on that? Because on Manifesto Core, this place where we have all these online groups for men, then what we found is that when men come from different backgrounds and have different faiths, we have radically different worldviews. And our worldviews mean that we just see things differently. We really, our beliefs determine what we see in reality. And when we see things differently, then it's actually very hard to have conversations together and be productive together and do anything. And so this thing of like sharing a faith, you know, people think like, oh, it's okay. Like, yeah, my girlfriend, she's into yoga and she's into this and this and this and this. And I'm a Christian, but like, you know, we'll figure things out. But the problem is like, when you just see the world completely differently, it's actually incredibly difficult to create alignment and agreement on anything, because you're actually going to have radically different experiences of the world. And so finding someone who especially sees God the same as you, you know, the ultimate good, the thing that you're aiming your entire life towards, the thing that draws you and lifts you up and elevates humankind. If you agree on that, then, you know, the other things can fall into place. But if you actually disagree about that, then it's very hard to create a positive, you know, uplifted life together, right?
Yeah. And if you are blessed to have kids in the future, how are you going to raise the kids if you don't share the same worldview? I mean, kids give you opportunity to test your relationship, shall we say. It's a beautiful experience, but it's also ascetic in a way, because it puts a strain on your ego and the ego of your wife. So and this is hard for us to accept. So it's good to have a good foundation that you share and that you work from, also in raising kids.
Yeah. Okay. So, Fr Mikael, can we just go quickly down to a little bit more foundational? You're married, I understand, even though you're an Orthodox priest. Can you just quickly touch on that? Like, why can Orthodox priests be married? We know Catholic priests can't. And maybe you can also tell us a little bit about like, what are the principles, or what's the relationship with your wife like? How do you guys have a relationship together, living in feminist Sweden as you are?
Yes, I'm married. An Orthodox priest must have made one or of two vows. Either you must have made the vow of celibacy, or you must have made the vow of holy matrimony or marriage. So this is before you enter the holy orders. And this is partly because it's not very good to have a priest, you know, being the spiritual shepherd of a flock or a church, and at the same time he's looking around, you know, to see if there's maybe a suitable wife among his spiritual sheep. So this is not very good. So one of those vows, and I'm a married priest, and I used to say that next to Christ, my wife is my salvation. I'm very blessed to be married to my wife, and she's a very wise person, very serious about her faith, and very serious about the faith and spiritual growth of our whole family. So she takes this seriously, and she has expressed that, you know, before we were married, we talked about, what are you looking for in a future spouse? And she said that the most attractive thing to me is a man that loves God. And this is really attractive. This goes both ways for us. So she was looking for a person that was devoted to God, and I was looking for the same thing. And so this is, we try to help each other, and we really share the same foundation in our faith. So, you know, in everyday life, we talk about our daily prayer life. We talk about how we should do the fasting. We talk about how we should, you know, help the kids, introduce the kids. We talk about things we read in books and experience. And this is, you know, we don't have to talk first, you know, 30 minutes about, oh, of course, you share the Orthodox faith, but I share the Buddhist faith, or I share the humanist way of looking at the world, and therefore we have different experience. You know, we share the same thing, and we can work from that in our daily conversations. So this ties back to what we talked about earlier. So she's really, as I said, she's next to Christ. She's my salvation. I thank God for her every day.
Can you talk a little bit about what that actually means to say she is my salvation, like maybe in a practical sense, but also in the terms of that we understand that in the Orthodox Church, marriage is a sacrament, actually, perhaps one of the most central sacraments. What does that actually mean?
Well, in practical terms, let me begin with the sacrament, because that's actually a good thing to start from. So in the Orthodox Church, marriage is a holy sacrament. So it means that marriage is a platform for spiritual struggle that is especially blessed by God, and it is Elder Emilianos of Simona Petra. He speaks about marriage as a place where three persons, so to speak, come together. So it's the man, it's the woman, and it's God. And together, those three work in synergy for the salvation of the couple. So it's a place where the power of God, so to speak, cooperates with the man and the woman. And the aim is for the man and the woman to, in the end, present their spouse before God and say that, Lord, this is the person that you entrusted to me. I have done what I could to present him or her spotless and without wrinkle, as St. Paul writes in Ephesians. So, and practically, this means that in everyday life, because that's where sanctity happens, and Christianity happens. It doesn't happen on special mountains or special places. It really happens in everyday life, working in your heart. So this means that in everyday life, you are reminded of that your ego should die and you should live in love for others. And this, I remember in the beginning of our marriage, small practical things. We had to find a way to live together. And I mean, we married quite young. I was 21, my wife was 20, and this is very young for Swedish standards. So we hadn't had time to get settled in our ways of doing things yet. So we were quite how you say,
malleable, more.
So quite early on, anyway, we were able to find things that try to work together, try to solve.
I can tell you that getting married at 39 and 38 years old, like me and my wife did, is more difficult. We are much more fixed in our ways.
Yes,
sharper corners that need to get bumped off. Yeah,
but by the grace of God, it's possible, of course.
Yeah.
And as I said, if you are blessed with kids, and we have 3 beautiful kids, this struggle to kill the ego is even more intense, because you don't decide everything for yourself any longer. You wake up in the middle of the night with a crying kid, or you stand in the middle of the grocery store and your kid has pooped all the way up in the back, up to the neck. I mean, so this is things that you have to work with, and as a person, it's easy for me, for example, to let pride do away with me, and other things. In fasting seasons, it's difficult to keep up the fast or what have you. And my wife, she can remind me about Father Mikael, you're not a saint yet. I know you. This is very, very healthy. It can be hard to accept sometimes, but so you need marriage builds also on humility as a foundation, and this goes also both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us as well, like I've never heard it formulated so clearly as in the Orthodox Church, where I'm not exactly sure where this comes from, but like the idea that there are 2 paths to salvation, and the one is to be a monk, and there you dedicate your entire life to God. You're married to God. But for me and my wife, this is an incredibly helpful thing that really focuses our attention, is that we don't just see our marriage as a tool to help heal ourselves, but we see it very much as the path. The path to God is through each other. And so when you speak about like this idea that Paul has of presenting your spouse spotless and blameless before God, then I really find like the idea of I've just been reading St. John Chrysostom talking about, really how Paul explains, like, your body is not your own, but it's your wife's. Your wife's body isn't her own, but it's mine. And so it's my, not just, it's my responsibility to purify it as well. And how do I do that? Well, the only thing that works is love. So needing to grow in love and our ability to love each other and to care for each other and to nurture each other, it's such a difficult thing to do. And having the right ideas and having the right understanding is not enough. So
no, it's really good, and it's good to remind yourself that when Christ calls us to love our neighbor, our closest neighbor really is our wife and our kids. Yeah. So we don't need to go a long way to other countries or cultures, because we need to begin by practicing love with the people that are really our closest neighbors, so to speak. Not to exclude other persons, but there's an arena of practice right there for you.
Yeah. Okay, well, Father Mikael, that's great for my next question, because that lines up to, we hear every day on the media and everywhere we go that love is love. And we should just be able to love everybody. And that means that we should, of course, like, I'm talking about the Pride movement and how also just like the whole sexual revolution, means that the way that we create relationships today with people and that people kind of have intimacy is that they go to a bar, they go to a party, they go onto Tinder, they find somebody, maybe they get drunk, maybe there's something happens, whatever, they go home together, they have sex. Maybe they call each other the next day, maybe they don't. Something happens, right? And then after, maybe they end up moving in together because one of them needs a place to live and is getting kicked out, or who knows, whatever happens. And then maybe at some point, like the woman falls pregnant and then they have a child and they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should go get married or something like that. So this is the standard model that we have for creating families and relationships today. And a lot of the people I know, this is how their relationship came about to be, right? It's they met each other at a party and then, coincidences led this way. So maybe the question I'd like to ask you is, what do you think about this model? And maybe you can also tell me what's the Orthodox model as opposed to doing this, how to create a long-lasting life relationship.
Yeah. Yes, you describe it quite well, but I need first to say that the people that come to the light of Christ, they come from this context. They come from this secular society. And they have maybe experienced and lived like this earlier. And it's important to say that, especially in your relationship, as we're talking about now, for example, this, even if it came about in this way, it's still able to, you can still sanctify this relationship as well, together with your partner that you live together.
Yeah, this is how I met my wife. This is how I met my wife. So
okay.
I hope I didn't sound too judgmental. If so, it was to be towards myself. Like I won't even tell you the details of how our relationship started. It's so confused and so
you're
far removed.
Then you're a good example of turning it as gift to.
It's been the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my entire life was meeting my wife and the journey that we've been on together, and how so. Maybe it's
I just wanted to say that, so people don't feel lost because it started in the wrong way. But having said that, what you describe is actually an inverted order of how God intended us to do, I would say, and I will come back to that. So when you do like most people do in Sweden and in Denmark, you get also the results that we see around us today. You get a lot of broken families and people that suffer, so to speak, from a lack of wholeness in their lives. You see kids raised by only one parent, usually the mother, and this is really destructive to the society as a whole. So if you want to do something good for society, stay together with your wife or man.
Not just for society, but for yourself as well.
Yes, of course. And we're going to talk about reasons for divorce later, I think, but I listened to ladies on a podcast once. It was meant to be a conservative podcast, but they were talking about marriage, and they said they still clung on to the notion that marriage is something that you agree on, as it's a contract as long as both agrees and get something out of the relationship. And as soon as that contract is broken, or one of the persons doesn't find it meaningful any longer, they can divorce. So this is really the liberal meaning of marriage. A Christian meaning of marriage is, of course, far more deeper even than the conservative view, in that it's an icon of the relationship between Christ and his church. So anyway, back to how people do it today. If couple just let their relationship happen as by chance, as you described, and this is quite common, you lose your apartment, and the most reasonable thing, seems to, we've been together for 1 month, we should move in together, huh? Yeah. And it's practical, you save rent, and you blah blah blah, all the things that you tell yourself that this is a proper thing to do. Or we are getting married in 2 months anyway, so let's move in together right now. All these things, it's like, letting your relationship happen without making clear decisions about the journey that you're going to take, or the path you're taking. So the moving in together just happened, or even meeting first just happened at the bar, and then maybe you move in together and you feel that this is not going the way we think, maybe we should do something about it. And they say, well, the two options, we should be engaged. This, in the movies, it usually works. Or we should have a kid. Well, that should bring us together again. And this is really disastrous, because having a kid is putting a strain on most relationships. As I related earlier, you don't get to sleep as much as you'd like, and you don't have you're not alone anymore, so there's a third person there. So people need to wake up and start to make actual decisions. This is what I want. I'm going to marry you because I want to be with you, and I'm making a commitment until my dying days that I'm going to be with you. This is the proper way to do it, because by doing that, you build a foundation of trust upon which you can then meet all the challenges of life that you are going to face. There's many men have problems with pornography. But I've heard one time someone speak about romantic drama movies as the pornography for women. I don't know how much truth is in that, but there can be sometimes unsound expectations on marriage and relationship that needs to be, taken down to earth. You need to understand that in marriage, you will always realize sooner or later, that you, to some extent, married the wrong person. As opposed to in the
your
movie.
Expectations will be disappointed. Whatever person you think you married, like, something else will show after the marriage.
So that's why you need the commitment and the foundation, and you need also the faith. You if you do it in church, you have the blessing of God to work together in your marriage. So
maybe can I just add a little bit?
Something is done and practiced by the majority of the population does not mean that it is good or true or beautiful. This is really important also.
Maybe I can just add something to what you said earlier as well. Definitely not just doing what everybody else is doing. So one of the things that we work with guys is to help them create a vision for where they want to go in the future, then to set concrete goals, and then to actually work in practice in an everyday level towards moving towards those goals, and therefore the vision that they've set. And I think the most powerful and challenging, but also the easiest way to get started with for a man is if you're a single man, is to understand the beauty of the vision of being united with a woman and how that can transform your life and create a family and make you into a father who can, kind of that's for me, everything I learn about leadership, about, kind of understanding the world better, becoming a more loving person. It comes through my role as a husband and a father in my life. And so everything else I becomes far easier when I master small little parts of how to perform those roles. And so being able to set that goal before myself and then thinking, well, what do I need to do right now to become the kind of man who can find the right partner, attract the right woman, who can, be able to look after, be financially stable and to be able to provide for a family and all these kinds of things, to be an attractive partner. I think one of the things that do attract women is being a man who knows where he's going and can create that clear progress forward. So you spoke a little bit about how like just coincidences and things happening in life lead us towards these major decisions of, deciding to move in with a person or something like that. I think as well, like, one thing I was really surprised when I came into Orthodoxy is that there isn't this kind of like, kind of finger wagging, condemning of, for example, people's sexuality and people who, are doing different things or something like that. There isn't this, sometimes there's a real puritanism in Christianity. As soon as you even like, if you have a girlfriend or something like that, then this like incredibly strict thing. You're not allowed to do anything outside of this. And if you do, you're like automatically a bad and evil person. Where in Orthodox Christianity, I find like a kind of an understanding and an understanding of where people are at and the need for them to be able to slowly move and change and find their own way and to do things not from kind of a legalistic understanding of like rules and regulations, but more of a growing love for God, which leads us to understand how to love other people in a good way. And my own life, as I mentioned, my relationship with my wife, it came from a very confused and twisted place about what love was between human beings. So I bought into this idea that love is love and you can't control anyone else. If you love them, then you have to let them be able to do whatever they want to. And certainly no one's going to tell me what I should be doing with my sexuality, not even my partner, right? Like I need to be free. And so there's this misunderstood which is understandable, like the father has to stand up in the middle of the night, maybe doesn't feel free, but I think that, and maybe we can talk about that afterwards, about how actually real freedom is found in these committed, responsible relationships, actually, of becoming a real human being. But anyway, my point is that it's something that can grow within our hearts as we come to an understanding of God, right? And that happens.
You're absolutely on point, and I love what you said. A man has to know where he's going to become a real man, and for us Christians, our only goal is Christ, and so the goal of the man should be Christ and become Christ-like as much as he's able to. And in the context of the family and marriage, that means dying like Christ. For his loved ones, for his wife and for his kids. This is really the self-sacrificial love and humility that we talked about in an earlier episode about role models for men. And we concluded that humility is one of the main things that men need to have. And this can be expressed in not a whimsical kind of way, but in a really manly way, in giving his life for first and foremost his wife and his kids. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I it becomes clearer and clearer to me how like this thing of giving your life, it starts as a bit of an abstract thing, and then you relate it to, okay, well, I have to give up a little bit of my time or a little bit of my sleep or a little bit of my energy. But when I look at my father now, who's well into retirement and getting older, like I actually see like he's given his life for his family. He has given his life for his family, and everything that I admire and can take from him as a man, as a role model of being a man, and all the goodness in my life and the things that that I can do well and naturally are all things that I've learned from my father. where he's actually sacrificed himself. And it's some of the things, it's even the things that I despised him for as a teenager. And I hated him for as a teenager, that I now realize today, like, wow, when I didn't see my father properly and what he was actually doing, and now I can really appreciate it. And then I can see, well, okay, well, I'm going to have to do the same thing for my child, you know. And I have a 3-year-old now, and so there's plenty of things I do that he really doesn't understand and doesn't appreciate at all. And it's painful for me to do it sometimes, because I see how, you know, he fights against it, and so it's not the easy way out. The easy way out is often to just let things slide.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a view of parenthood today that you are supposed to be your kid's buddy or best friend, and this is not really good. It's not what you're supposed to do as a father. You're supposed to be the father, and I think being a father comes with a certain responsibility of order, putting boundaries, and showing this is how we do it in our family. You know, this will eventually bring security to the kids and to raising the kids.
Maybe I can ask a little bit. You were talking a little bit earlier about, like, you know, you and your wife, you have the same principles, and that helps you really to know how to live your lives. How do you deal with that when sometimes you understand principles differently? Because one thing is setting boundaries and creating order for your children. Like, sometimes I have to, especially with a 3-year-old, I force my children to obey. And if he doesn't, then I'll physically, you know, because he'll do things that are dangerous for him. You know, he'll run out into the middle of the road. With my wife, I have to have a very different approach. So how does one deal with things when you actually have a direct disagreement? What's your approach there?
Well, there's also one thing that I'm thankful to God for my wife. She is a person that is very communicative. Sorry, that's a word not very easy in my mouth. Communicative, anyway. So this means that she, for example, if there's something between us, she is not able to go to sleep before that is solved, which has resulted in that we've spent quite many hours late at night during the years trying to solve things, talk through things, and she has forced me to put words to my feelings. I'm not always very good at that, but she has taught me more about that. And that is really something I think is a good thing for men in general, to be able to try to put words to their thoughts and feelings, and that way they would it will help them you know, come to terms and work on their passions in a way, if it's pride or whatever, what have you. But if we disagree on something, I think some things we will always to some extent disagree upon, because we are different as persons. And we will always view a few things a bit different, but we manage to work and live together in spite of those small differences. But of course, if there's a big difference that is not you know, able to, it cannot exist, and the relationship exists at the same time, so to speak. We haven't had any such serious thing, but my approach is really to pray and to be really, how do you say, show patience, and try in my best way to express in a way that she might understand. In the beginning of our marriage, I just gave her a book. If you want to understand this, you read this. And it resulted in a stack of books on her. So that didn't work because she didn't read the recommendations I made. So, but as time went by, I began to understand her better, and she began to understand me better, and how we communicate not only with words, but you know, all the small things in life, a touch, a laugh there, a gift there, something like this. And through all the means of communication, I would be able to eventually make a point, but it might take a year or even longer if there's something that, because it's easy for for us to explain a thing to the rational mind, and we can understand it, but to make it part of our experience of life, to change how we view life in a certain aspect, this needs to come about in a more existential way, so to speak. So that's why you need patience with some things.
Could one say that that's been one of the difficulties or challenges of our entire Western society and our of Christianity, maybe to a certain extent as well, especially in the West, is that it's become a little bit disembodied and it's up in the prefrontal cortex much more, and we've disconnected it often from, and maybe it's also a male characteristic as well, is that we think much more of abstract ideas, and don't always focus on that. I think Father Mikael, maybe we can in some time have a whole conversation about the married life and spouses and dealing with these things. That probably could be interesting. The next thing I'd like to just ask about was I've really experienced, especially since I've become married, I've noticed a real difference when I meet other men, if they're a married man or if they're an unmarried man. What does that change inside a man when he takes that step into marriage? And do you have an experience of that?
Yes, I do. It's hard to speak for all married men and non-married men, of course, but one difference might be that a married man has this everyday opportunity to let his ego die for his wife's sake. And as we've said, also more intensified when the kids eventually come. Yeah. So this I think is something that an unmarried man, he lacks that natural arena, so to speak. Yeah. And I remember one time I used to work part-time at a warehouse driving a truck, because the church couldn't afford paying a salary. So I had to make money some way. And one of my colleagues, a younger brother, he came up and he told me that, Michael, you and all the other dads, people that have kids, you're always so relaxed and, at peace. Whereas we, the younger kids, are much more, intense. And I don't remember his exact words, but why is that? Why do you think that is? And I said, well, as soon as you have kids, it is not longer yourself that is the most important person in the world, but your kids. Your kids are. And I think that applies also to this question, that a married man realizes that there is something more important than himself, someone more important rather, and someone that he finally finds the reason to exercise his true manliness. I'm talking about this self-sacrificial love. He can exercise it in relation to his wife and his kids. And this is really, this is something really beautiful. This is possible, of course, also for unmarried men. But I think that they need the church to help them find ways to express that.
It's definitely not easy for an unmarried man in the culture today. And I'm speaking from experience of, even, so I spent a large part of my adult life unmarried, and a large 7 years of that, I was on a spiritual search. And very early on in that spiritual search, I realized the path to love, to enlightenment, to spiritual growth is through service to others. I knew that. But if I look back at that time, I was just a playboy. I was just being a playboy, this kind of like going with the flow and enjoying the fruits of life. There's so much abundance in our society today. And for men, this is a disaster, actually. It's actually the greatest disaster we're facing.
The Western culture doesn't offer anything, that doesn't talk about self-sacrificial love in any way. So it's difficult to find that sort of motivation if you base it only on the cultural influence. But if you are somehow awakened to other values, I'm talking mainly about the Christian faith, of course, you might have this motivation inside you. I know, for example, of a person that goes regularly to an old folks home and sits down in a group of conversation with the elderly. This is a very good way to practice self-sacrificial love, and you can find all other arenas for that as well, to practice this love. But you really need to, you know, come out of your own ego. That's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah, and I for me, the Orthodox Church was like, it was the necessary community. I think being anchored in a community and having a set of practices that help to do this as well. At least certainly when I experienced all kinds of other often commercial New Agey related forms of spirituality, and then the secular culture as well, then it's just so hard as a man to keep that focus, I think. But marriage just has this effect on guys. It's like, you are the thing that enables a marriage to actually work, especially in our culture today, is self-sacrificial love. Like, it's a necessary ingredient. Otherwise, things will fall apart. At least that's my experience. Okay, so maybe if someone's listening to this and they're thinking like, oh, this marriage thing sounds interesting, and maybe there's even some Swedish guys there that have, you know, been interested in it, had some hope. What would you say is, what should a man look for if he is considering getting married? What is a good wife to consider?
Wow. We've spoken about it already. First of all, a woman of the same faith, or at least a Christian faith. I know that there aren't perhaps too many Orthodox women or men in Sweden, but I think the most important thing, a woman of the same faith, or at least a Christian faith, somewhat traditional. The same faith is the foundation of a good marriage, I think. It's not a guarantee, but it's at least a good condition to work from. If you don't, as we've said, if you don't even share the faith, your everyday life will be filled with, you know, strife and constant quarrels.
Or just a lack of intimacy and connection, I would say, as well. Like, you can also just kind of ignore all the stuff and just be parallel boats going somewhere, but there isn't a real intimacy, which is what makes marriage work as well, right?
Yeah, intimacy it comes from faith as well, because if you share the same faith, it's also easier to completely trust each other. I would say also that a living spiritual life in the church is something to look for. Humor is great, because you face quite a dull and boring everyday life. You know, you drive your kids there and you do this and you blah, 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 blah. It's good to have humor, to laugh together and laugh at sometimes the miseries of life. Good manners is something good, because, well, it speaks for itself. Kindness, humility, respect for elders, things like this are all good. But it's also important to say that a man looking for such a woman must first himself also become worthy of her. I mean, there's a lot of talk on the internet now. You have basement dwellers, men that sit and say what they want in a wife, but they themselves doesn't even shower. So I know it's a bit of a caricature, but you yourself have to be enjoined to Christ, live a spiritual life in Christ. So you must prepare yourself for faith, in faithfulness to Christ, in his church as a man, and fostering good manners, living in purity and humility. And as St. Paul says somewhere, you leave childlessness behind and be manly. I mean, it's literally what he says. And leave the childlessness behind, and
or childish ways, not
childish ways.
Yeah, yes. Childish ways. Yeah. When I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child. But now I'm a man, and so is that what you're referring to, right?
That's. But also, I think it's in Philippians or Ephesians. He talks about how you leave the childish ways behind and become manly. I mean, that means what we're talking about, that you know where you're going and you try to live acquiring the virtues in your life. You just don't live, haphazardly, not having any real focus in your life, but you live with a focus, and the focus is Christ.
Yeah. Maybe I can make a little plug here, Fr Mikael, because this is the way I earn my money. So I'm full-time working to run a network of groups online for men only. just because we've noticed that guys relax and open up and share much more vulnerably and easily and think the same way when there's only men in the room. And if you put one woman in the room, then they change, especially when they're single guys. But even with married guys as well, we relate differently to women. So we found there's a real advantage of just being guys. We often, there's similarities in the way that we both face problems and deal with them as well.
Yeah.
And so, and what we do is we get an understanding of what's the highest thing. There's a lot of non-Christian guys in this group as well. Increasingly, as I'm putting out Christian content, obviously I'm having more and more Christian guys signing up. And so we created an idea of like, well, what is it that I'm aiming for with my life? What is the vision? We have this like drawing that's inspired by Jonathan Peugeot of his cosmic mountain. We try and draw onto this mountain, like, what are the elements that I want to have in my garden of what the good life looks like? And then you can make concrete goals based on that. So these are the things I want to do in the next 12 months, in the next 3 months. This is where I want to get. And then based on that, you say, well, what am I going to do every single day that's going to help me to move toward these goals? And then each guy gets put into a group, and then you actually once a week, you meet with your group, and then every single day, these guys are in contact with each other, have a little buddy check-in. I do this with my own biological brother now. Every single day, 2:30, I ring up my brother. He lives in Canada. And I check in like, what's the thing that I need to do today that's going to help moving me towards my next goals? And I think that if one has a really good life in the church, then I think this isn't necessary. But I think especially for men, myself, I've spent many, many years of my life developing really bad habits and losing that integrated focus on where it is they want to be going. And so being in a solid group of people who are helping me and are trying to do the same thing in their life as well has really helped me to create that focus in my life.
Well, the church has its own tools, but I don't see why a group or a project like this could be a complementary thing as well. And especially in Scandinavia, it's a very individualistic society, and having this really focused, scheduled community, it's something great, something really great that takes us out of our enclosure, so to speak.
If you're a man trying to create order and structure and direction in your life, then having an order and a structure and a direction to plug into helps you to do that as well.
Yes,
so,
well said.
Good. Okay, so we're nearing the end. Maybe can I finish off by asking? I mean, maybe we've covered this as well, but for a person who's in a bad marriage or something where they feel like things aren't going well, maybe it's the boredom of doing the same things all the time. Maybe there's these conflicts. Maybe there isn't a real intimacy. Maybe the sex life isn't working very well. And people that can obviously lead to a lot of frustration for men as well. What should one do in that kind of situation?
Well, this is really a tricky question, because the first and foremost thing I need to say is that it's a mainly a pastoral question between you and your priest. So if you experience those kinds of problems, please speak with your priest and see and ask his guidance, because it's very difficult to speak generally about a bad marriage. I mean, you can have a sexual frustration or be bored, or you can have someone abusing you or hitting you and things like that. I mean, you're going to get different advice depending on your type of problem. So, but generally speaking, the church encourages the spouses to endure in prayer and see prayer as a way, or the marriage as a way of gaining spiritual treasures. And maybe by God's grace, it is able to be turned for the better again. Endurance is not something that our society speaks generally very much about today, but the church does, and we don't want to see the holy sacrament of marriage discarded all too easily. But that being said, there are times when all hope is lost, and the marriage is not an icon of Christ and his church in any way, which it is supposed to be. And then the church might accept a divorce, but it does not come about easily. So,
are there specific things that you say like this would be a grounds for ending a marriage relationship then?
Well, there is one ground for ending, and that's how you say it in English.
Infidelity.
Infidelity. Thanks. and if there's no repentance or no healing being done from this abusive relationship, eventually it would be a cause for ending it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why infidelity? Maybe why do you think that's so important? Like, I think for a lot of people who have this, after the sexual revolution, then people don't get why that should be so important anymore.
Well, because the holy sacrament of marriage is iconic, and it's meant to resemble the relationship somewhat to Christ and His Church, and infidelity is always connected with idol worship and things like that in the Old Testament, and in this pattern remains in the New Testament as well. So infidelity breaks the iconic relation between the spouses, and also it breaks the foundational trust that marriage is built upon, because one of the expressions of the intimacy of the couple is the sexual union. And this, I mean, if you have sex with someone and you don't share the intimacy and the trust, and it feels a bit, I can imagine, it feels a bit awkward. Or maybe I'm wrong, because but I mean, you need to have all the good things in the marriage to have also a good sexual relationship. If you lack trust, if you lack intimacy, then your sexual life is going to be formed by that as well. So if you break that trust and intimacy and go into infidelity, it breaks the foundations of the marriage.
Yeah. It's so, yeah, it's like sexuality has been so, the only word I can think of is degraded. It's become so degraded. It's become like a thing, like, shaking someone's hand or brushing your teeth almost. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but
yeah.
I think that there has always been this understanding of sexuality as something incredibly sacred and incredibly precious. And with contraception and with the kind of, like the media that we watch, all the stories, if you look at all the stories, sexuality it's so cheap. It's been so cheapened, right? Even for myself, I grew up in a very conservative home, but I went full on into, when I moved to Scandinavia, then the culture, it seemed so modern and progressive, and this was the future, right? And it was all about like a cheapening, if I look back on it, and especially as I started getting into kind of spiritual circles, then unfortunately, kind of like non-Christian spiritual circles, there's an even further cheapening of sexuality. Even as they're talking about sex as sacred, then it's something that you also can just do with whoever you want to. So it's very contradictory and confusing. And so it really was difficult. But for me, this was actually the greatest barrier, is because there was a part of me, my animalistic desires that wanted it to be true, that sex could be beautiful and sacred and transcendent, and I could do it with whoever I want to. But it just became so clear that was actually the barrier that was stopping me, not just from, marriage and from living a good life, but actually from seeing reality the way it was. Is that reality, the way reality is, the way human beings are, is that sexuality is probably one of the most powerful tools we have from nature. Maybe it's just something that's given to us by nature to connect with another human being and to create a good life. And when we treat it that way, then everything else can fall into place as well, because it's one of our foundational drives. And when we play around with that, or when we ignore that, then it brings in so much chaos and distortion into everything else that we're doing in our lives.
Yes,
I think this is a major problem that men are facing today.
Yeah, indeed. They need to understand, men today need to understand that sexuality is something sacred, a gift given by God for the proper use, like everything given by God. And if you're raised in a Christian home, with classical Christian ethics, so to speak, still you need to understand that it's not do this, don't do that, but you need to understand why it's like that. And our sexuality is given to us also for proper use, so that we can understand where we come from and where we are going. So it needs its proper place in our life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Father Mikael, anything that you want to add at the end of the conversation here before we finish off? I think this has been a good covering of life for between men and women in Sweden from an Orthodox perspective.
There's a lot more things one could say. I hope that those listening and watching this will find it in themselves to explore this topic more from a traditional Christian perspective. I say again, don't listen to progressive voices, either within or without the church, on these topics, because they are wrong. They are informed by our humanistic age. Listen to the church and listen to the tradition of the church and the saints of the church, and submit yourself to God in these matters. I guarantee that it will be a help for you.
Amen. Thank you very much, Father Mikael.
Thank you.